So colitis, or what's called pancolitis, would be the whole colon, even celiac, Crohn's. I mean, any of these autoimmune gut issues, oftentimes that's going to create a lot of muscle wasting. That ties directly into what we just said, though, which is nutrient deficiencies and infections. A lot of these people with major gut issues like this, there's usually a trigger. Now, in the case of like celiac, obviously, that may or may not have a parasite infection involved, but this is still part of the equation, and we can use gut healing nutrients to work on this. You can put some of this stuff into remission, but what I don't want people to do is like eat clean all week and then they go eat garbage on the weekend.
Correct. Yep. No, 100%. And so, of course, if you have colitis, right, whether it's microscopic or ulcerative colitis, it's an extreme irritable bowel disease, you got to look at the foods. And then sometimes the foods could even be in vegetables. It could be in the oxalates, the phenols, the salicylates, the FODMAPs. So sometimes even healthy foods on paper could be problematic. And then, of course, the grains and the dairy and the refined carbohydrate and the omega-6 fats, of course, those, right? So getting the inflammation via food is super important. We talked about dysbiosis. We talked about SIBO. H. pylori, of course, is super common because H. pylori is notorious for lowering stomach acid. And so, of course, if we're just taking stomach acid and enzymes and we're not fixing the H. pylori, that may not get to the root cause. So if we're taking supplements like hydrochloric acid or enzymes or bile support, we also got to make sure we're getting to the root cause of any additional bugs that could be present. And if we're chronically stressed, like the adrenals, if we're in sympathetic fight or flight, the sympathetic fight or flight nervous system tends to be more catabolic than anabolic. So anabolic is building back up, healing, recovering, getting stronger. Catabolic is breaking down. So if we're in this fight or flight state, our bodies always tend to be, running versus building and growing. And so if you're catabolic from the adrenals being overactive with cortisol, that's going to make it hard to build muscle. You're going to be breaking down the muscle instead, making glucose out of it. And it's also going to be harder to digest because your body's hardwired to take blood and bring it to the extremity so you can fight, flight, or kind of run versus to the organs so you can absorb and break down. So that fight or flight is really important for digestion, for where the blood goes, and also in how it allocates nutrients. It's more likely to break down muscle than build muscle back up when that fight or flight's really active.
That's a good call. That's exactly where I was going to go
Mm-hmm.
next, is hormones. I was going to talk about maybe low testosterone. We're seeing that in men in their 20s, 30s, 40s. I mean, just low hormone levels. And women need some level of testosterone too. So if you do have hormone issues, whether that is adrenal related, cortisol, thyroid hormone, maybe you can riff on that for a minute, because I think people are focusing on gut, which is great, but there's also this other connection of the hormone piece. And I will tell you, my cortisol was completely depleted when I did a salivary panel years ago. My cortisol was flat all day, and it was really tough. No matter how much I tried in the gym, I was weak. Like, just, my God, I could not make progress. Fortunately, it's better now, but man, I've been through it.
Yeah, and some people, they may be really high with their cortisol, and we have to use adaptogens to calm it down. Of course, like good diet and lifestyle things. Some may be low, and typically you don't just go low all of a sudden. You tend to be on the higher overstimulated side for a while, and then you tend to crash. And that's where that low cortisol kind of comes together. And with that chronic low cortisol, a lot of times we see low DHEA. And DHEA is important because that's going to be a precursor to a lot of men and women's sex hormones. And so women will go more down the estrogen side, men will trickle more down testosterone. These are both anabolic hormones. And so if we have lower DHEA, that tells us the adrenal issues that are going on are more chronic, and DHEA will go downstream to more of these anabolic building up type of hormones. So very important to take a look at your DHEA, because that could tell you if you're in a more catabolic inflamed place. And also too, if you do exercise, I get it if it's like your first couple of movements, it's like a new exercise kind of thing. You may be a little bit sore because it's new, but you shouldn't be overly sore after your workouts. If it's a new thing, fine, or it was really, an acute hard workout, but in general, you shouldn't be overly sore, more than 2 days or so later. You really shouldn't. You should still be able to function. Like maybe you feel it, like it feels like you did something, but it's not overly sore. If you are, and it was a reasonable amount of exercise, it wasn't like you did too much, you're probably in a more catabolic state. And it's also, you could be over exercising too. So you got to make sure you're not over exercising.
Yeah, or I'm thinking like, what about a lactic acid buildup due to gut bacteria or a mitochondrial issue due to some sort of toxin where they're just depleted, they're not recovering well, they're not performing well. So maybe not directly related to muscle mass, but I think mitochondrial issues could be something to look into. You and I measure this and look at this on an organic acids test, and we often find a lot of issues. I mean, we're in a toxic world with a lot of chemicals, metals, pesticides, and so these things damage the mitochondria, which to me would directly impair your ability to perform. Is it directly reducing muscle mass if your mitochondria are damaged? I'm not sure on that. I'm sure we could look into it, but it makes sense.
Yep, absolutely.